everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Smarter Sourcing, the Healthcare Edition, where we talk to healthcare supply chain leaders with the issues that they're facing today. And today, I have the great pleasure of being joined by Amanda Chawla. And Amanda is the Chief Supply Chain Officer and Post-Acute Officer at Stanford Medicine. Super happy to have you here, Amanda. Welcome.
Thank you, Eric. Glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
So we're gonna, cover some ground here. Some of the basics, and then we're going to get into really kind of a little bit of a master class on one specific topic around governance and supply chain and the way that you're thinking about that today. Well, let's kick it off with maybe an easy opener question, which is, who is your favorite Big Ten school and why is it Northwestern University?
Oh, wow. I don't think that question is biased at all. I'll go with you on this one this time, Eric. I will say it's Kellogg. It's a school that is near and dear to my heart, only because I just graduated about a year and a half ago from Kellogg's executive MBA program, which was a decision I made to go back into school. And I just think they do such a phenomenal job in terms of really bringing in life and industry experience into the teaching environment.
Yeah, well, as a Big Ten person, I would agree. But for those of you keeping track at home, Amanda also went to the University of Washington, which, in the most roundabout way possible, is part of the Big Ten. And we
It
won't get
is.
into Pac-12 and Pac-10 or Big Ten and how that evolved. But either way, it's worked out. And maybe an add-on question to that. I don't think, and I think you may win for most degrees, 2 bachelor degrees, 2 master's degrees. I think I counted 15 letters behind your name, maybe from an education standpoint, for within the chief supply chain officer ranks anyway, maybe one of the heaviest focuses on education. What's that meant to your career and, what role has that played in your development?
I sometimes wonder, Eric, am I getting bored? Why am I going back to school? No, but in all seriousness, I am truly a believer of kind of the growth mindset. And I think really to imply it and really to think about designing and leading for the future, we have to continuously learn and widen our lens. What we learned 5 years ago, a year ago, 20 years ago continues to evolve. And so part of it for me has been that mission of wanting to learn from other industries, learning about different perspectives, and bringing those principles in the way that we operate. If we're really going to transform the future and doing that today, we have to do that with that growth mindset. And so to me, going for the degrees isn't just to get letters behind the name. It's really that exposure, that experience, that those conversations that you have with different people and different mindsets and getting that broader perspectives and borrowing, because ultimately what we do is we borrow from other industries. We translate it into our reality of the current challenges we might be operating under.
Yeah, well, certainly a huge time commitment to go to Northwestern Kellogg and in the midst of also managing a huge role. What was the coolest thing or best thing, most impactful thing that you brought from Kellogg into Stanford?
Yeah, so we got to select electives, and one of the electives I did, two of them actually, they're a tie for me. One was the concept of design thinking that was in Dubai, and the other one was in product management, where we spent 3 weeks in India in the Silicon Valley, looking at startups to very mature, large organizations and understanding how they're using AI to disrupt the way that they're doing. The reason why I bring those two concepts in here is the world that we live in revolves around this concept of design thinking about when you're looking at problems and issues in your department, how do you think about the pain points first and not the solution? And giving you the right tools to think about the framing in the way that you operate. So I feel like for me, I've brought that not only for myself, but to my entire leadership team about how we're actually operating the supply chain and understanding the pain points before we run into solutions. And the AI component, I can talk about that all day, but it's also broadening the lens of how we have had to and need to continue to upskill our employees and look at technology as really an enabler. And so that combination is very, very relevant to the work that I do.
Great. And we'll talk about technology in a little bit. But I wanted to talk first about Stanford, your most recent role, 10 years. Is that right? 10 years in your role?
Almost there.
Almost 10. And congrats on sustaining your effort over a long time period. And maybe, I kind of saw it in 3 different phases, and we'll talk about those phases. But I remember your early days there and I don't want to make statements around it, but you inherited a challenge, I would say. How did you tackle that challenge and evolve to what Stanford is today, like a wild success story by any measure? How did you get from point A to point, or you're not point B, point K, whatever that is.
Yeah, great question. Wow, Eric, you're definitely taking me back on the memory lane here. So when I joined Stanford, oftentimes we think about Stanford as, a very strong brand, leading edge, from an education standpoint, cutting edge medicine. But when you started peeling back the onions and you got into supply chain, what I recognized early on is that this was a department that we had only underinvested in, but was not operating as a supply chain organization. Everything from the fact that half of our organization was outsourced. We didn't have functions like master data management. We didn't have a category management team. We didn't really have sourcing. We had buying. Required me to take a huge step back and really start thinking about what's the infrastructure. What is my long-term goal of what I'm trying to accomplish? Who am I trying to service? Because I had to address the fact that every single day I was getting calls from nurses, from leaders about, I don't have the basics. I don't have product XYZ to care for my patients. And so, really thinking about the architecture of how the department needed to operate was my starting point, the infrastructure. Then looking at the leadership, the people. Who do I have? What skill sets do they have? Where are the areas where we don't have those skill sets? And then third, what resources do we have? What tools do we have to ensure that our teams can be successful? And the fourth concept I'll talk about is I can have the best idea and the most grandiose vision or strategy, but it's not going to matter until everyone's aligned. And so the first couple years, I really focused on this concept called internal branding, which was, let me align on what our mission is and have every single team member across the leadership down to the front line really understand the work they do, the purpose of their work, and why we're trying to evolve and what that would mean. Because that was going to be required to actually evolve our supply chain.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense. And I had the privilege of, I think, being at one of those early meetings and looking at, you had the combination of heavy youth early in those days, and then these outsourced consultant people. And I thought, wow, how is this going to ever work out? And you really done a great job, exceeded everything that I thought you could do at confidence. But really, it's been impressive. And then if you layer in all the industry accolades, you look at, supply chain department of the year. You've been the armchair. You're on the SMI board. You top of Gartner's rankings. Just really an impressive journey of sharing back, and of developing something with that maybe hadn't kept up with the clinical side of Stanford. So really kudos to you to be able to get that up. And so maybe, let's talk about, you talked about a little bit of the startup phase and how you thought about that. It kind of had a build phase, and then what I call kind of the yielding phase. Anything to share around those kind of different phases? Did you think about it in phases, or was it more sequential than even that?
That's a great question. I thought about it really as I'm on a transformation journey, and in order to be able to get to my target, which I'm not still there at, I have to continually evolve. If we don't have a very clear mission of what we're trying to do and a vision, and we don't have the right infrastructure, I'm not going to get there. And so, while yes, a lot of it came down to leadership, structure, resources, came down to partnerships, understanding our customers, having the clinical dyads, having the business dyads, understanding the industry. A lot of what we do is we borrow from each other, we learn from each other. And so as much as I'm internally focused on Stanford, I'm also externally focused on how we're evolving as an industry, because there's things we can share in both ways. But I will give a lot of credit and kudos to my entire leadership team and my staff, because they're the ones that do the heavy lifting to be able to translate the ideas and be able to execute. And so, yes, the build phase to kind of evolution phase is slightly different, because you're talking about different types of topics. You're working on different types of complexity of problems. but it fundamentally requires a consistent framework where it's a people first framework. You're thinking about your technology, you're thinking about your cultures, you're thinking about your infrastructure, and you're thinking about your business processes, and how do you bring all of those things together to enable the output.
Yeah, and, as I think about your pillars, and maybe it's staff development, if there's any secret sauce, staff development, investment in technology, and then industry leadership. If we dig into staff development a little bit, you've hired really some high-powered staff that are doing their own things, in many ways. They have their own voice in the industry at this point, and you've cultivated that. How did you work with senior leadership and HR? I have a little insight into that from some past stuff, but how did you do that? How did you get that kind of collaboration, within Stanford to let you hire and develop the folks that you have?
Yeah, I think the very first part is you gotta build trust. You gotta produce results. If you build the trust, you produce the results, then you can advocate. All those three things come together. And it wasn't a one time I was done. Hey, I've got what I need. It's every year I'm building on that. And so internally from infrastructure, one of the things that helped enable the output of being able to recruit and being able to work with our human resource department teams required that our leaders needed to operate differently. And so what I did is I modeled essentially a clinical dyad modelship into a non-clinical business of support services because we work in healthcare. And so each one of my leaders has a leader that they are unofficially dyad with in which they are bringing value. We have multiple hospitals. One of the things we did is we took from our supplier industry quarterly business reviews, and we do quarterly business reviews with our customers. And so that's producing results and building trust. When you do that, and we do that with HR, by the way, and marketing and all these other non clinical departments, when you do that, you're able to go to the table and say, I've gotten this result, but in order to get this, I need a different type of skill set. And oftentimes, what I've done is I've looked outside of healthcare to say, category management is a standard here. Demand planning, this is what a demand planner needs to look like. We want to be leading edge here at Stanford, linking it to the organizational mission, to the work you do, to then be able to write the right job descriptions and recruit at that higher level of talent. And you're upskilling your entire workforce in doing so. So it's not one conversation, it's not one approach, but it's using this multi-prong and making sure that we're producing the value not only operationally but strategically to the organization as well.
Yeah. It's work, foundational work. I guess maybe it makes, I don't know, if some of the other things easier. I don't know if easy is the right word, but certainly, mission accomplished for you. And I always know it's a work in process, right? It's good today and a moment at a time, but it takes constant vigilance. But let's talk about technology. For sure, one of your hallmarks, I'd say, of Amanda Chawla is that you've leaned into new technology, existing technology, technology development for supply chain. Talk me through how you came to that. I don't think that's just randomly happened. How did you build that into your strategy?
Let me maybe start off with this concept. We have been thinking about things as a data first and technology as an enabler to solid processes. And so for that, that's really been a core involvement of how do we equip our people with the right resources and tools so they can be working at their highest license. And some examples that I would give is, a lot of health systems, I will say, have control towers. But what does a control tower really mean? For us, what we've done is we've looked at every single metric in supply chain. You mentioned the operational pillars that we have. We have 5 operational pillars. We've linked every single metric into an operational pillar. So it's not just a report, it's embedded in the way that we operate in our operating system. It's part of our daily huddles, it's part of our decision making cadences, it's part of our root causing problem solving, it's part of our monitoring, it's part of our performance management goals. All of these things have come forward that have then enabled a technology roadmap to occur. While we have technology roadmap that goes out multiple years, it's reviewed and revised each year. The foundation is how do we build strong processes and continue to refine them because we're never really there. And how do we have that data health mindset? So, whatever technology we bring on, we're overlaying with good information. And then when we think about the technology ecosystem, what technology have serving what purpose, and then how are they interconnected. And an example I'll give is several years ago, we brought in some university students because we were having challenges understanding our sourcing. What price are we paying? What's really our benchmark? And every time we went somewhere, it gave us different information. Well, what we realized is as we still peeled back the onion, is that our technologies were pulling from different sources of information. What does price mean? Well, what's the agreed upon definition? And getting to the weeds of that allows us to clean our work, but also create an ecosystem where we're leveraging technology to the best of its ability and thinking about the interoperability as well.
Yeah. No, that's great, and you've helped a lot of, technology companies develop and then bring benefit to other organizations as well, so kudos on that front. And maybe that's a piece of the industry leadership. I sometimes I laugh and I think about our early days, of working together, and I think maybe encouraged you at one point to, you know, get it more involved in the industry as a whole, having no idea of your engine and what that was gonna mean, right? All the things that you've done.
I remember that conversation.
It's insane, and I think you just must have been shaking your head baldly going, "Well, what are you talking about? I'm gonna do these things," and, it's been great. But I wanted to you made a comment to me in thinking about this recently, which is about redefining of the role of chief supply chain officer, and, I just I wondered what, wanted you to kinda unpack that one a little bit. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to the industry? Share that with our audience here, if you would.
Yeah. So my view of the chief supply chain officer, we went from materials management to supply chain. And some people will evolve it further, but I view that the chief supply chain officer is really that chief resource management officer. So just like you think about the chief human resource officer, the CHRO, they set the people strategy. Now that doesn't mean every single person in the organization reports to a CHRO. My view is as the supply chain officer, I'm the spend management officer. I set the financial strategies in partnership with the business. I get to see everything that's purchased across the organization because it's going through purchasing one way or another. It's going through buying. And how do I leverage the talent and the skills that I have strategically in my function of we're a neutral party. If we can negotiate PPI contracts and we're not surgeons operating on patients, why aren't we negotiating and working on things like, technology contracts, marketing contracts, strategy contracts? And so that's where I think the evolution of supply chain really ought to be is more in that strategic area where you're providing that strategic value as a senior executive to the rest of the executive team because our job is to ensure the organization is financially viable. Equally, our job is logistics. We are very, very strong operators. We ensure the right product at the right place at the right time. And so how do you blend those together is really been, I think, the work and my viewpoint of what a chief supply chain officer, chief spend management officer ought to really be thinking about. And a lot of that has to do with relationships, but this concept of governance and partnerships. And I think when you're able to double down on that, your effectiveness increases and the effectiveness of what your teams can deliver as well.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I always call it being the CEO of supply chain, CEO of all spend, and there's major gaps in that. Like all the benchmarking areas show, whatever, 75% span of control roughly. It's that means 25% of the spend is left unmanaged, if you will. Not listening to the end user, setting specs, sourcing, doing the things that you do. But let's spend the rest of our time then on just kind of getting there. Let's talk about the details. How would somebody get better at this? How are you planning to get better at it? I don't think you got everything all nailed down, maybe not yet, but how are you thinking about, spend management and governance over that and how supply chain can help?
That's a great question. So I'll say I started this journey probably about 6 or so years ago. This has been the evolution. It hasn't been the 10 years. And we created a program originally called non labor spend. Every year, supply chains are given a target of reduce X%. Okay, supply chain, let's go behind the scenes and figure out what contract we're going to do and how we're going to get there. And we're so focused on the price at the pump But at some point, it's not about price at the pump. And so, how we've really evolved is leveraging the program of non labor spend and converting that into a governance model in which it's reported at the highest level of the organization. It's part of our operating plan organizationally for every single organization we serve. And my philosophy has been supply chain is a supportive arm that gives the insights, put the program infrastructure together, but it needs to be equally owned by the business. I will never be that pharmacy director that's running pharmacy or that IT manager or that marketing personnel. So how do I bring those people together? And so having a organizational governance approach and a structure in which you can look at the non-labor spend program, and the way that we've done it is we've created committees. We have an indirect committee that's focused on anything that's non-labor, purchase services, etc. We have a medical committee, we have a pharmaceutical committee, and now we're looking to evolve into adding a capital committee. Each one of these committees are co-chaired by the business with supply chain as the supportive arm. And then every single senior vice president and executive has a representative that sits on a subcommittee. And what the work here of this is to say, let's look at expense management in a bigger, broader lens of not just price at the pump, but where do we have utilization? Where do we have variation? What service levels do we need to rethink? Where do we have synergies? And so that then becomes your enablement to enable your supply chain to be strategic, is to really think about it and double down on governance and partnerships. That's what we're doing today. I think how we need to continue to evolve that, and the pieces that we are still toying with, is how do we bring our suppliers, and which strategic suppliers do we bring as partners in our governance? And we've done a little bit of that work with a few select suppliers to help enable that, because it's not just about the intra. There are expense controls that we can do with our suppliers to help on both ends. How do we make this a win-win? And I think that's the evolution of spend management, is it really can't just be internal. It has to be as equally upstream and thinking about the holistic supply chain cycle and how do we make it more efficient collectively.
Yeah, so much to work on within that world, right? I'd love to hear that capital's a part of it. It's like 7% of the spend. It has a huge impact. There's cybersecurity, like that one is like purchase services, I guess, in indirect spend areas that don't come in a box. It's been no neglected, but maybe less focused would be the nice way to put it. And are you kind of, when you say you've got these committees, are you kind of earning it area of spend by area of spend? Are you looking for big areas of spend that are unmanaged? How is that working? Did you get like carte blanche to go across the whole thing? Or is it just, hey, we win in one area and we take that and leverage that to another area sequential?
So it's been a multi-year transformation. I'll go back to the trust. We started with one hospital. We produce results in the medical space. We produce results in the performance improvement place. And then we expanded in some indirect areas. And as we produce results, it's hard for the organization to ignore that this is a model that works. And really what we're doing is we're bringing one central point of visibility on all cost savings. And we're not saying it's supply chain's work. We're saying it's non-labor spends work. And so from an ownership standpoint, we're bringing our partners to be co-owners and co-leaders of this. So they've got a stake in the game and they get the value proposition. And that has just flourished to the point like it's like, has it gone through non-labor spend? And it's beyond the transactional. I mean, we've even created protocols where a certain dollar amount, no matter what department, what executive, including our CEO, is asking for it, we've got now policies and guidelines that goes through this governance. And so I think it comes down to producing value, results, and building relationships. You start small and you continue to expand, and it becomes something that you can't ignore or look the other way, because you're repositioning what supply chain serves and how supply chain operates in an organization.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And, I'd love to hear too that you talk about service and service levels, that within any of these categories, particularly the stuff that doesn't come in a box, that's the hardest thing to nail down. I always think about, what's happened in the laundry and linen industry. And I used to go from, pounds and utilization. And now the first thing I ask is how old are the tunnel washers? like of your partner. Like, will you have a capital failure because they're not investing in that business? And you almost need to understand it at a different level and be resourced to think about it differently. And then multiply that by 800, and then you start to get to answers. But is it at what level in the organization is this success being publicized, I guess, within the, as you've transitioned and transformed the governance? Are you having to constantly reinforce that message, or is the organization demanding it of you?
It's a combination of both, to be fully honest. You have to continuously reinforce non-labor spend is here, but there's organizational support and backing. It's like I said, written in our operating plan. It's part of our strategic plan. Non-labor spend is there. And so we even have gotten to a point where it's a shared management goal between supply chain and many other departments who have that opportunity. It's embedded into our budgeting process. So it's more than governance. It's built into the infrastructure and the way that we operate and the view of what non-labor spend provides for the organization. And the other reason why I say it's a little bit of both is naturally you're gonna have attrition, you're gonna have turnover, you're gonna have new executives, new leaders come on who may have different philosophies around their scope, their work, their spend management, because it's their department. And so that's the reinforcement piece is like, I'm here to be your partner. I'm here to help you be successful. This is our organizational structure as to how we do that.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you. It's a hard area to tackle, right? People always talk about the last frontier, but this may be one of the last frontiers of areas of spend and impact, and how you tackle it is great. But we're coming to the end of our time. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience before we go, Amanda?
I think the only thing that I would share is when you're thinking about your role, when you're thinking about the work that you're doing, think about kind of that big picture. For me, that's what's really served me well is, from a career standpoint, I've done a little bit of everything. And honestly, that provides me that greater perspective in not just leading supply chain, but I've got this other evening job, I say, which is leading post-acute care. And I get the honor and privilege to be able to see everything from the warehouse all the way going to the patient that we're serving at a skilled nursing facility. And so thinking about continuity, transitions, and value with purpose and taking the time to connect with your teams, taking the time to really continuously transform is probably a key message. And recognizing like I've made plenty of mistakes. I will continue to make plenty of mistakes. But if we don't try, we won't evolve.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm inspired constantly by your dedication, and in your engine and the things that you've tackled. Just for the industry, thank you on behalf of Smarter Sourcing. We'll call this one a wrap. Many thanks to Amanda Chawla at Stanford Medicine for joining us today. Thanks to all of you for listening, and everybody take good care.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone.